Okay, we're gonna get started. First of all, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Kirsten Slaughter and I am the Membership Engagement Director here at Wisconsin Farmers Union. Thank you for joining us today for the WFU Farm Bill Preparations webinar. Wisconsin Farmers Union is a member-driven organization committed to enhancing the quality of life of family farmers, rural communities, and all people through educational opportunities, cooperative endeavors, and civic engagement. The Farm Bill is a very important piece of legislation that affects the lives of all farmers and all Americans, and it's time to start the work of preparing for it again. Today, we will hear from Vivienne Kerley Cruz from Wisconsin Farmers Union about dairy, and then we'll hear from National Farmers Union Vice President of Advocacy, Mike Stranz, to help us dig into the process and details of the Farm Bill. Before we start, I just want to cover a few Zoom housekeeping items. This event is being recorded, and we will share the recording on the WFU YouTube channel after, so it's easy for you to listen again and share with others. You will be sent an email when the recording is uploaded. We're very excited to hear from you and any questions you may have. You can ask questions by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Again, if you move your mouse around, you will find the Q&A button and you can submit questions by clicking on it. We'll be covering all of the questions at the end. Any questions that we're unable to get to during the webinar, we'll be answering afterwards and again, sending you those along with the recording. And at this time, I'm very pleased to turn it over to Vivienne.
All right, I am going to share my screen. Kirsten, Mike, if you could just give me a thumbs up that you can see it once I start the presentation view. Oops, sorry, let me go back. I'm likely going to have to go off camera because my Wi-Fi might be a little bit spotty. All right, do you guys have me? Great. So, hi everyone, thanks for having me on here. I am excited to talk a little bit about the CIS research that has come out in 2020, as well as the connection to the Farm Bill and some of the work that we've been doing here in Wisconsin around Dairy Together. So I kind of want to give the overview again. We're going to talk a little bit about Dairy Together and the context here, as well as a couple of the researches we've seen over the last few years and the Farm Bill. Let's see. So Dairy Together has worked to build a coalition to educate and push for a national growth management plan implemented at the federal level. This really started in 2016 with many of the folks at Wisconsin Farmers Union and partner organizations as a result of the dairy crisis, which was happening in the 2014-2015 time. Between 2015 and 2019, 7,339 dairy farms had gone out of business in the US. Dairy farmers nationwide were facing their fourth straight year of negative income as a result of dairy markets chronically failing to successfully align the milk supply with profitable demand. You can see a graph here of that decline between now and 2022. It is pretty striking. This one is specific to Wisconsin. I'm going to go back. In the 2014 Farm Bill, a growth management plan was nearly passed but failed on the floor at the 11th hour. And in 2018, for some more context, the Margin Protection Program was amended and renamed the Dairy Margin Coverage Program. And research in both 2019 and 2021 has suggested huge benefits for the adoption of a national growth management plan. Here is another graphic that really speaks to some of the issues and dairy farm disappearance. Some of the factors that are credited to this are increased cost of production, incentivized overproduction, corporate consolidation, and loss of quality incentives. We've also done a lot of work since the beginning of Dairy Together for continued education for farmers, stakeholders, and legislators. That includes the Dairy Roadshow, some of the meetings with Canadian dairy farmers, upcoming educational series, and other work. And this education is really critical to coalescing support and getting other groups and individuals involved in this movement. Here is a graphic of the roadshow that happened in 2019. The roadshow really brought to light the nationwide struggles for family farmers in the dairy industry, and illuminated the similarities in struggles that dairy farmers were having all the way from California to Wisconsin to Vermont. You can see listed out all of the places that the roadshow visited, and it really provided an opportunity to hear and address concerns, as well as establish coalitions of interested groups and individuals. Here's a really cute photo that I found in the depths of a Google Drive of the roadshow. Everyone looks so happy, so I wanted to share it. So from there, we kind of get into some of the research that has backed up the growth management plan. And I think it's important to highlight all of the things that I just talked about as kind of a reasoning and urgency for some of what this research has showed. In 2019, Wisconsin Farmers Union helped to fund the research for around a growth management plan that was conducted by Charles Nicholson and Mark Stevenson. And some of the key findings looked at the impact on farm viability, positive impact on milk prices and dairy farm profitability. It showed that there was reduced market volatility and a very balanced dairy supply. I think one of the biggest takeaways is that had a growth management program been in place starting in 2014, thousands of farms would not have gone out of business. It would have helped manage dairy oversupply, reduced market volatility, improve dairy farm profitability, and farm income would have been more than double for all farm sizes for farms that had limited growth to allowable amounts. And those numbers of prices are pretty stark. So from there, we get to August of 2021, where Charles Nicholson and Mark Stevenson have released an updated study. And this is kind of what the meat and potatoes of this presentation is going to be about. And I want to preface this by saying that I am not an expert. I'm going to hopefully give kind of a view from 1,000 feet of what this looked like. And I'm going to do my best. So this study was developed in consultation with Wisconsin dairy farmers and their organizations like Wisconsin Farmers Union and more coalition groups who provided input on program design principles and intended objectives. It was organized by the University of Wisconsin Center for Integrated Agricultural Systems, often abbreviated CIAS, and supported by grants from the University of Wisconsin and USDA. This is a mathematical model based on the commodity supply chain model outlined in previous research. So the overview of this program, I'm just going to kind of define some terms that are going to be used throughout. The first is allowable growth. And as you can see on the screen, the allowable growth is the amount of growth allowed for a dairy farm before a market access fee is charged. This can be measured in a number of different ways, including total percentage growth or total additional pounds. The market access fee is paid on total milk production or additional milk production. There are different ways of doing it. If production increase is larger than the allowable amount of growth. Tiers 1 and 2 kind of measure two different tiers of allowable growth. The program, you'll see in future slides that allowable growth is going to be measured or might be abbreviated as API, allowable production increase, and market access fee will be abbreviated as MAF. Both of these programs, or this program, can be implemented continuously with fixed values of API and the MAF, or could be modified based on dairy market performance thresholds. The potential impacts of the growth management plan were analyzed for prices, farm price variability, farm profitability, milk production, US dairy product exports and imports, government impacts, dairy product sales. And I'm going to show some graphics that highlight a couple of these. I just don't have time to go through all of them, but I will link the research if you are all interested in digging in more. So one of the major things that that has had some concern for growth management is new farmers coming into the market and how that could work. Chuck and Mark specifically tested what new farm impacts could look like and examined the impact of allowing up to 60 new farms per year, 5 farms a month for the entire period simulated of 2 sizes. The first being less than 1 million pounds a year, and the second being 1 to 5 million pounds a year of milk produced without paying a market access fee on production growth during the first 3 years of operation. Now, 60 farms per year was set arbitrarily to give the challenges of addressing how a growth management plan would affect incentives and ability for entry by new farmers. This is kind of a graph of the findings. You can see all 5 mechanisms here that were tested by Chuck and Mark. And you can see the tiers and allowable growth on this side. You can see that, sorry, I got a little lost. I'll move on to the next slide. Some of the key findings that I thought I would highlight. This is a graph showing milk price variation. And you can see that reduction in the average variation in milk prices ranged from 16 cents a hundredweight to 21 cents a hundredweight. This is government expenditures on sorry, I'm stuttering a lot, I apologize. Compared to the baseline, a federal growth management plan could reduce US government expenditures on dairy supports by as much as $2.5 billion. That is with this third mechanism, but all of them you can see do reduce government expenditures. The simulated milk price, here is a graph. It shows that the average annual milk prices were increased between 73 cents a hundredweight and $1.41 a hundredweight, depending on which mechanism is used, including refund payments for farms within allowable production increase limits. Average milk revenue would be higher by $1.15 a hundredweight to $2.13 a hundredweight. You can see here, I'm not sure if you can all see my mouse, but in January 2017 to January 2018, there is some of the mechanisms do not stay above the baseline, but it is important to note that the prices are more stabilized over the long term. Moving on. I didn't get that. Oops, sorry. Could you try again? Siri. Sorry, some key findings. All 5 of the programs would reduce variation in milk prices, enhance average milk prices and margin over feed costs to varying degrees, and increase average net farm operating income for operations staying within the allowable production increase for all farm sizes compared to a baseline scenario with existing policies. An average Wisconsin grazing dairy staying within allowable growth is simulated to experience an increase in average annual net farm operating income of up to 74%, which they estimated at $23,000. I think here is an important place to note that we at the Wisconsin Farmers Union haven't selected one of these mechanisms to move forward as kind of the base for a plan. Other groups are moving forward, but it is also important to note that we do support a growth management plan in our policy because either way, all of these mechanisms are still increasingly beneficial than the status quo. So this brings us to kind of the Farm Bill and why we find this to be such an important thing to be a part of the 2023 Farm Bill package. A lot of the reflections that we talk about from 2014 and 2018 around growth management and the potential that that would have had in the Farm Bill has massive impacts on so many farmers. Again, going back to what I had said at the start of the presentation, that the research suggested that had growth management passed in 2014, thousands of farms would have stayed in business. And I think that, 2023 is an opportunity for us to preserve as many farms as we can and not go another 5 years without some patching on the bullet wound of bleeding farmers. Coalitions are currently being built and strengthened around getting this into the next Farm Bill, drumming up support, doing continued educational series. And it's really important that we bring these groups together on a unified message as we continue to hurdle towards the Farm Bill so that we don't have so many competing plans and that we're all on the same page for what we're working towards. What can you all do as listeners is to get involved in Dairy Together, to talk to your neighbors about growth management. You can attend events. We have a number of upcoming events. We have a video that is going to be released soon that you can share with your networks. You can write a letter to the editor. You can organize within your dairy cooperatives. And here are some helpful links. If you want to get involved, you can go to dairytogether.com and you can sign up with us to be getting alerts for when we're having events so that you can see the work that we're doing. If you would like to see more of the research or use an app that simulates what impacts a growth management plan would have on your farm or the farm of your neighbors, you can go to dairymarkets.org/GMP and see the research from Chuck and Mark, as well as their app and a number of different resources. And you can stay tuned for upcoming events. And that is all I have for you all today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vivienne, for that overview. And now I'm very pleased to turn it over to Mike Stranz.
Hi there. Good afternoon, everybody. Just had to look at the clock there. Really glad to be here today to speak with you about Farm Bills past, present, and what you're able to do when it comes to Farm Bill time. I mean, Vivienne provided a really great overview of where things stand on Dairy Together and how that effort is coalescing around action on the Farm Bill and how it made efforts to that end during the 2018 Farm Bill process and what can be different for the quickly approaching 2023 Farm Bill. So hopefully I can provide some context, a little more background about what the Farm Bill is and what you can do about it. Again, I'm Mike Stranz. I'm the Vice President of Advocacy for National Farmers Union. I, in a previous job, worked on the House Agriculture Committee staff on farm bills, but probably more importantly, I worked for Wisconsin Farmers Union about 12 years ago or so, and spent some time with NFU then, and then came back to NFU about 2 years ago. So really great to spend some time with you. And I see some familiar names on the participant list right now. But when it comes to the Farm Bill, Farmers Union, amongst all the different interests and organizations represented in Washington, has a unique role to play in the Farm Bill process because we care about everything that's in the Farm Bill. If you've seen a Farmers Union state or national policy book, it's a lengthy document and it contains views on pretty much anything related to agriculture, food, rural communities, and our country in general. And the Farm Bill matches up nicely with that. So when it comes time for Farm Bills, National Farmers Union, Wisconsin Farmers Union, farmers unions across the country step up to the challenge and welcome it because there's a lot of decisions to be made about the future of our sector of the economy, our communities, and that's why we take it so seriously. So again, today I'll talk about what is the Farm Bill, what's coming when the Farm Bill arrives, and what we can do to influence it. I'll try to break some of those down a little bit and leave ample amount of time for questions at the end of this part of the show. Looking forward to those questions too. So first off, we'll talk about farm bills passed. The 2023 Farm Bill would be the 19th Farm Bill since the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933. Now, farm bills have shifted in scope and in the national attention and in approaches towards farm policy and everything else that's contained in it. But it's been interesting to follow how, 1933, we're in the midst of the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, and it was a last-ditch effort to save many farms, and National Farmers Union was right there talking about it then. And to know that so many Farmers Union members have been influential on farm bills, coming up on our 19th year that we've been weighing in on this, to know that we're all playing a part in this is pretty exciting, and also comes with a lot of reflection to know that there's a lot of people out there, Farmers Union members, who have a lot of expertise and a lot of firsthand experience when it comes to working on farm bills. I'll note that in the evolution or the lifespan of farm bills, they've shifted a lot. Probably one of the most notable, well, a couple notable things. One is that each farm bill that's passed nowadays is an extension, or excuse me, preempts the underlying what we call permanent law. Some of those bills from the 30s and 40s are still active if the current farm bill expires. We call that permanent law, and everyone's trying to fend off, generally everyone is trying to fend off the arrival of permanent laws. That's what creates this 5-year need to re-up the farm bill. If we went, if nothing happens legislatively between now and October 1st, 2023, a lot of programs would revert to those from the 30s and 40s and would cause some interesting things to happen. Some would say cataclysmic, some would say exciting. I think I would agree that exciting is probably one of the things that it would be exciting, that's for sure. But generally that's avoided because of the threat of permanent law. So that's one piece that's interesting about farm bills passed. And secondly, the scope of farm bills really started to take shape into what we see nowadays in the 60s and 70s, when more nutrition requirements or nutrition legislation was added to the farm bill mix. We hear a lot about the Farm and Food Coalition that has built up around the farm bill, and now we spend a lot of time, people working on farm bills, trying to expand that coalition further and further. There's always been a tie, or often has been a tie, to conservation goals. But now there's more emphasis being placed on climate efforts. There's more emphasis being placed on rural development. There's more emphasis being placed on crops that hadn't otherwise been involved in farm bills. There's been a lot of evolution on that. But like I was saying, there's a lot of partners in the coalition nowadays when it comes to the farm bill. On this slide, very illegible, tiny writing, you can see some of the dozens of programs that are geared towards farmers in the 2018 Farm Bill. Again, that's just on farmers, let alone everybody else in society who has a stake in all the programs there. But you think about everything that's included in the Farm Bill, whether it's nutrition assistance through the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or if it's through access to capital through farm ownership and farm operating loans. We're talking about risk management through things like dairy margin coverage or crop insurance. You've got disaster programs like the Livestock Indemnity Program. You've got the Title I of the Farm Bill programs, the commodity programs like agriculture risk coverage and price loss coverage. You've got the Conservation Reserve Program and Environmental Quality Incentives Program geared towards conservation efforts. There's broadband deployment, telemedicine, rural mental health efforts, substance abuse prevention and treatment. There's a lot of stuff in the Farm Bill, and they're organized in titles. In the 2018 Farm Bill, there were 12 titles. You can see each of those here. And again, they're covering some pretty broad topics. Now, the 12 titles that the 2018 Farm Bill includes are not magic. They can change. At one point in the even as recently as the 80s and 90s, individual commodities would have their own titles, and then they started being grouped together a little bit more, so that now you just have one singular commodity title that includes all, well, most crops. And there's also been times, say in the 2008 Farm Bill, when there was a livestock title and a commodity futures title. Livestock title came around because livestock organizations, Farmers Union and others thought that there needed to be more guidance of the livestock sector through the Farm Bill, and thus had it included. By the time the 2014 Farm Bill came around, opinion had shifted amongst the decision makers in Congress and they got rid of it. So things can change, and we can add things to the Farm Bill, we can take things away from the Farm Bill, but it takes a lot of work to do that, obviously, when it comes to creating legislation. One of the biggest factors that plays into what's in and what's out of the Farm Bill, of course, is money. And really the thing you'll hear a lot about, if you haven't already, is about Farm Bill baseline. The baseline is a comparison figure that looks at how much money the last or current Farm Bill is spending, and then the next Farm Bill's difference from that baseline. That is a hugely oversimplified way of explaining it, but that's generally what it is. Bigger outside factors outside of agriculture can influence whether or not Congress is going to have more or less money to work with, more or less baseline to work with when crafting the next Farm Bill. You think about 2002, Farm Bill spending increased in 2002, or at least projected spending through baseline increased in 2002. We were coming off something that sounds so crazy now, but budget surpluses, and that the national debt was being reduced. We didn't run a deficit on an annual basis. One of the ways to spend some of that was through the 2002 Farm Bill, which in fact increased spending projections. The 2008 Farm Bill, well, things changed. The economy was in a different place in 2008. Austerity was the name of the game in 2008 to an extent, and then definitely the case in 2014, where efforts to cut from the Farm Bill were rampant, particularly related to the nutrition title. The 2018 Farm Bill has been described as less revolutionary and more evolutionary as compared to previous Farm Bills, and that ended up with essentially flatline spending projections. This is just on a top level. Each Farm Bill ends up having a lot of discussion, debate, bickering about how much each title, each part of the Farm Bill is going to be able to spend. So we'll dive into a look here on how things broke down in the 2018 Farm Bill. The Farm Bill discussion opened up in 2018 with the release of baseline projections in April of 2018, before action started taking place legislatively. You can see where some of the priorities were. The scores for the commodity title, you see, went up by $101 million. That's essentially a flat line when you're talking about $31 billion over 5 years. You see some changes around the edges. You see a reduction in the score, or a savings in this case, for rural development. That was via an effort that there's something called the cushion of credit. It's real. There were some funds that moved around a little bit there. So really, any of the big changes you see here are not really that big. $1,785 million, or $1.7 billion out of $428 billion over 5 years, is essentially a flat number. So in 2018, the discussions were about how to shift things around a little bit and continue the 2014 Farm Bill, essentially. But I keep talking about making these changes. We have to learn more about who is making these changes. And to that, we turn to the agriculture committees in both the House and the Senate. So in the House Agriculture Committee, there's about 50 members scattered across the country. You can see their congressional districts represented here. You see a fair amount of largely rural areas represented here, but it's a good smattering around the country. Also reflective of where each party's strength generally is found. So you've got several Democrats in California, New England, and New York, a few in the South, and a couple smattered across the upper Midwest. Republicans heavily from the South and throughout much of the Midwest as well. So there's about 50 some members of the House Agriculture Committee who will be key to advancing the next farm bill. In the Senate Ag Committee, there's 22 members and heavily concentrated in the middle parts of the country here. In fact, Minnesota and Iowa both have 2 members of the Ag Committee. So both senators sit on the Ag Committee in those 2 states. As a native Wisconsinite, I am also disappointed always that there isn't a member of either Ag Committee from Wisconsin. However, Senator Baldwin and Congressman Pocan, and maybe others, I don't recall offhand, are both seated on the appropriations committees and play a key role in some of the spending after the Farm Bill is authorized. So they do play a big role there, but just not directly on the front end of Farm Bill discussions. So with nearly 75 people involved on the agriculture committees, that's a lot of people to organize into making decisions. So there are 4 key leaders that play a huge role in what is in the Farm Bill, how it's going to work, how negotiations end up. And those are the chairs and ranking members. So the chair of each committee, obviously, is the highest ranking member of that party who's in charge. So at this point, both Democrats in the House and Democrats in the Senate have the majority. So Senator Debbie Stabenow is the chair of the Senate Agriculture Committee. This is her second stint as chair. She served in that role during the 2014 Farm Bill process when Democrats had control of the Senate. On the House side, Congressman David Scott is the chairman. He's new in this role. He's been with the Agriculture Committee for about 20 years, but recently ascended to the chairmanship after Congressman Colin Peterson was unseated from his spot atop his spot in Congress. So Congressman Scott from the Atlanta suburbs is now chairman there. On the Republican side, in the Senate, the ranking member or the top ranking Republican on the committee is Senator John Bozeman from Arkansas. And in the House, it's Glenn or G.T. Thompson, congressman from North Central Pennsylvania. Both of those 2 individuals are relatively new to this role. Senator Bozeman took over as ranking member, I forget if that was 18 or 20, I think it was 20. So they're both new to that. Mr. Thompson also took over in late 2020 as ranking member. So what does the process look like? I'll take you through a photo tour, I guess, of the steps that the Farm Bill is going to go through in the coming years. So again, the Farm Bill, as it currently stands, expires on September 30th, 2023. A quick look at the calendar says that that's about a year and 9 months away from right now. And this is high time for Farm Bill season to kick into gear. And in fact, as soon as about a couple weeks from now, we're going to see some of the first public activities there. So one of the things that's been going on already and will continue to happen throughout all this process is that members of the House, members of the Senate are going to hear about Farm Bill priorities from constituents. A prime example, a great example of that comes from Wisconsin Farmers Union and others involved with Dairy Together. And the priorities that you're bringing forward there and that we're bringing forward as Farmers Union get discussed. The pictures here, I guess, are both from fly-ins, National Farmers Union fly-ins in the past few years. And again, even if you're a member of Congress or you're a senator isn't on the Agriculture Committee, talk to them about it anyway, because they're going to talk to their friends and colleagues who are on the Agriculture Committees, and they'll have a chance to weigh in if they want to when issues like this are discussed on the floor of the House or Senate. So keep telling Senator Baldwin all about it, and that'll help build stronger connections. I think Chairman Scott from the House Agriculture Committee noted at a hearing recently that the House Ag Committee is going to start taking up Farm Bill hearings in the next several weeks. And we'll be watching those as the committee reviews implementation and further suggestions for how things went in the 2018 Farm Bill and how they can be improved upon in the 2023 Farm Bill. So I think during the run up to the 2018 Farm Bill, there were 50 to 60 hearings in the House Agriculture Committee alone dedicated to the next Farm Bill, getting ready for it. Many of these took place in person in the Agriculture Committee rooms here in Washington, D.C. Experts come in, professors, economists, lawyers, individual farmers and ranchers, organizational leaders are all brought in to talk about what their priorities are. But one of the things that's a real exciting part for, well, the members of Congress like doing it, but so do the staff, and that is going on field hearing trips. Hopefully, we're entering a time sometime soon where in-person meetings that move around and attract big groups of people will be a safer and healthier thing to do. In Farm Bills past, there's been a real emphasis placed on this, on getting out into individual members of Congress district, into their states, and hearing from people directly. You can see here the Minnesota Farm Fest from a few years back usually would attract not only the Minnesotans, but also members of the agriculture committees from across the country would want to learn more about what people in the upper Midwest have to say about farm bills. Farmers Union has a strong history of holding these sorts of events. They're not unlike the Dairy Together roadshow events that have been going on in past years, where oftentimes the best input is gleaned when you're out amongst the people who are going to be directly affected by the policy changes. So members of Congress like doing it, going on these, and it's also a good way to be seen in your own district. Once those ideas have been gathered and some of the staff of the agriculture committees and the congressional staff have gotten together, overall bill is put together, usually by the majority party in both houses. Each has their own version of the bill. They call it the chairman's mark usually. And that bill is brought forward before the committee, and then a business meeting is held where line by line, section by section is debated and potentially amended. These meetings can be lengthy and contentious. I think the House Agriculture Committee hearings and the markups on the Farm Bill in 2012 and again in 2013 each took upwards of 16 hours and oftentimes produced some pretty heated rhetoric. But some of those debates can be impassioned, and rightly so. These are very serious and far-reaching measures. So provided the bill makes it through markup and is approved by the committee, the bill then moves to the floor of either the House or Senate, where there's debate and potential amendments, depending on the rules of debate and amendment that are agreed to by either chamber, and then brought forward to a vote by the full body, whether it's the House or the Senate. I think Vivienne made some reference to it here, but the dairy stabilization efforts that were underway in the 12, 13, and ended up being the 2014 Farm Bill were brought. There was efforts to remove the stabilization parts of the dairy policy during the markup in the House back in 2013. That failed, so it was not removed in the 2013 markup of the bill. But when the bill then moved from the House Agriculture Committee to the full committee, or excuse me, to the full House, the amendment was brought forward again. And in that situation, the amendment was agreed to, and thus the stabilization piece came out. So you can win a battle at one level and still lose it later. Same goes the other way around. You can lose it at one level and win later on as well. One thing to note, the last two farm bills have both failed at one point or another on the floor of the House, which is usually very few bills meet such a fate where legislation comes out, the committee goes through a very rigorous markup process, amendments are considered on the floor of the House, deals are presumably made, but then revolt at one level or another results in a bill that fails on the House floor. Depending on your point of view, that's bad news or good news, but it was a trying time. And in both instances, the major debate was about funding for nutrition programs and how much, if at all, it should be cut. These sorts of stresses we find, I think, to be problematic in keeping this broad coalition of farm, food, rural development, conservation, forestry, horticulture issues and constituencies together. So the more times we break the Farm Bill in two and then piece it back together, the harder it gets, or at least that's the thinking. And it will be interesting to see what happens this time around as we enter further into the Farm Bill process. In any case, that's an aside there. We've had two fails of the Farm Bill in both 14 and 18. Now, provided the House passes a Farm Bill and the Senate passes a Farm Bill, or at least most of them, most of the Farm Bill, sometimes that's happened too, the two chambers come together and have a conference committee meeting. Conference committee is made up of the senior leaders of both the House and Senate Agriculture committees, not just the chairs, but some of the higher ranking members all around. Oftentimes, farm bills include some provisions that touch the jurisdictions of other committees too. So leaders from those committees also are brought into the conference committee process and have a big meeting at a giant square table in the Senate and go through some of the provisions. Now, there might be some active debate during these conference committee meetings, but largely the negotiation has gone on behind closed doors with those leaders and their staff, oftentimes for many months, to get to a spot where they can approve something out of conference. That is it's an important part of bringing together the ideas that the House has come up with and the ideas the Senate has come up with, and they need to put those together before taking that final report back to both the full House and the full Senate in order to have a identical bill pass both chambers so that it can be brought to the president to be signed. Now, the last two farm bills were signed by the president when they went into effect. President Trump signed the 2018 Farm Bill in December of 2018. President Obama signed the Farm Bill into law in February of 2014. Interestingly enough, the 2008 Farm Bill was vetoed twice by President Bush. There was an opposition. He had strong opposition to the lack of cuts throughout the Farm Bill process and the market adjustments that would come from the continuance of farm programs. So he vetoed it, but Congress overruled it with a 2/3 majority vote twice. There was a clerical error after the first one, so it needed to be when it was vetoed. So it required a second passage of the override. Pretty wild stuff. In 2002, however, he did sign the Farm Bill, and that's what that picture's from. So this time around, there are things that could change the circumstances that between right now and when the Farm Bill is being debated. One of the things most pressing, I think, is additional legislation that could pass. In particular, the Build Back Better Act. Of course, this is part of President Biden's overall plan to that has included funding for pandemic relief, infrastructure, both physical infrastructure and social infrastructure, and the Build Back Better plan that had passed the House back in October or November now, and has kind of languished in the Senate, would include about $27 billion for climate and conservation priorities. That money may well have a spot in the Farm Bill where it's an additional, it's been added to the programs existing in the Farm Bill and would thus count towards the baseline of the next Farm Bill. That could be a pretty significant chunk of money for the committees to work with when identifying priorities to help address climate change. So passage of the Build Back Better Act could make the next Farm Bill stronger, depending on how that works out. Another thing to keep in mind is that a pretty important date comes up between now and the end of 2023, and that's the November midterms. And the people who are in charge and the spots that they are in could well change or could move around. Even if control of either the House or Senate doesn't change, there might be people who retire, people who are unseated and somebody else comes in, you never know what's going to happen. So the committees are going to charge ahead this year with hearings and getting some of the work done, but and that'll help regardless of what happens in November. But the actual, once the negotiations start in earnest in 2023, likely, we may have a different or the same set of individuals there. Also, the market could change. It can change a lot in a day, just if you look at the Dow Jones, but if you look at commodity markets and the state of where farm prices are at, be it dairy or row crops, that has a big impact on what the next farm bill could be, both in terms of baseline, or how much money is expected to be spent on farm safety net programs, is down right now because prices are projected to remain high. The good side about that, if you're into farm bill spending, is that you might be able to increase some of the support levels without incurring any cost or much cost, because the prices are expected to be high anyway. So that's one piece of it. The downside is that the baseline has shrunk because there's less money expected to be paid out in the coming years. So it's kind of it's like a double-edged sword, I guess. Additionally, market implications have far-reaching effects, whether it's especially when it comes to nutrition programs as well. When the 2008 Farm Bill was being debated and considered, obviously we were entering the Great Recession, and the expected costs for SNAP eventually went up much more than was projected at the outset. And that can have some bearing on how the Farm Bill plays out. So those are a few things to consider. Of course, as Vivienne talked about with Dairy Together, there are a lot of ways to get involved. I'll touch on a couple more here. With the Farmers Union conventions underway, and Wisconsin's this weekend. National Farmers Unions is in a little more than a month, but either as delegates or as Farmers Union members who can talk to your fellow members who are voting delegates at these conventions, you can have a say in the policy process. The 200-page long NFU policy is what me and my colleagues use to spread the news up on Capitol Hill about what our priorities are. And you can get that changed and adjusted to fit the needs and priorities you've identified. So get involved there. We'll have fly-ins or zoom-ins or whatever it's going to be, and other calls to action in the coming months and weeks, years, I suppose, too. And that's a good way for you to get involved. And again, I really want to emphasize the importance of sharing your ideas and views, whether it's kicking them around here in a relatively informal conversation, whether it's during a Farmers Union county or state meeting, whether it's with Congress, a member of Congress or a senator, you've got ways to get those ideas out there. So I really recommend you do that. And there's ways to be one of those big influential parts of the Farm Bill process. The Dairy Together piece, the study with the empirical evidence and the charts and graphs carries a lot of weight when you're talking with a member of Congress. And those sorts of statistics and information are eye-catching, are compelling, and can be used to advance the policy priorities. I was looking back with some friends recently who I used to work with about how the early conversations going into a Farm Bill process can help dictate the conversations towards the end of it. You can get those ideas out there early and get people talking about them. They start to be part of the overall dialogue, debate, and discussion. And having the Dairy Together idea out there early on certainly helps keep it in the mix, either right away, but as the process moves along as well. I show this picture here. This is from the 2012 Farm Bill process. NFU hosted a Farm Bill Now rally, which was a result of Congress being stymied for a while and getting the Farm Bill passed in 2020 before the elections. And we brought together a small rally in Washington that caught some headlines and got some attention. I still have the Farm Bill Now sign back there. So for a while I had it as Farm Bill Later, but truly it is now Farm Bill Now season. So looking forward to working there more. And again, I just wanted to thank everybody for tuning in here today, and thank you for being Farmers Union members and neighbors. And it's an honor and always exciting to work with you all and work for you all as we try to get set for the next Farm Bill and reach some good outcomes in 2023. So thank you, Kirsten, and thank you, Vivienne, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Mike. We do have a couple of questions that I'll ask now. And just as a reminder that if other folks have questions, to put those in the Q&A so that we can get those asked. One person is asking about the influence of lobbyists from large corporations and kind of wondering how, besides like organizations who get involved in this, are there additional influences that affect the Farm Bill?
Absolutely. There are plenty of lobbyists in Washington. They're all very interested, or many of them are very interested in how the Farm Bill works out. I'm a federally registered lobbyist as well, and that's not to defend lobbyists, that's for sure. But you know, there are organizations and corporations and interest groups that have people out there trying to influence the outcome of legislation like this. I think that lobbyists like those from Farmers Union are distinctly different from the large corporate lobbyists that are not representing people as much as they're representing cash. And I think that Farmers Union is about making sure that people's voices are heard, and we do the best that we can to make sure we're connecting the voices of our members with members of Congress. So yeah, there's lobbyists out there that wield a lot of power, it seems, but we're trying to push back as we can.
Thank you. Another question about big priorities for NFU, and I know part of that is defined in our convention that's coming up, but do you have an idea or guess on some of the big priorities that will be issues for NFU?
Yeah, so the policy committee process is underway for National Farmers Union. That's where 7 or 8 members from across the country are brought together on a rotating basis from different states to consider changes to the policy document. NFU's process is underway right now. We've got, they've been meeting now 7 different days now on Zoom. We had them meet virtually this year, and they are considering all those different options. You know, what will be interesting at the National Farmers Union Convention is to see what is approved in our special orders of business. It's kind of a separate set, but connected set of issues that members want to underscore, boldface, and highlight as what is most important for the coming year. So the policy committee is coming up with some ideas on those. Members and delegates can add to the discussion and bring forward some ideas there too. So I would expect that Farm Bill issues will be top up there, and as will, you know, a whole host of other issues related to climate, related to COVID, related to competition, you name it.
Thanks. Also a question on kind of dairy together strategy, I think. So one of the things that Vivienne talked about was with the proposals that we're looking at, a reduction in government spending, but some opposition around increasing consumer prices that has come out. Is there a way of helping to make sure that we can continue to talk about this and how those two things might be talked about?
Yeah, that is one of the aspects of farm bills that's been very important, and getting them passed year after year or relatively regular basis is that coalition between nutrition advocates, consumer advocates, farm interests, and you name it. And if things start to break down between those groups, it can be difficult. The Dairy Together proposals with the concern about increased consumer prices that's a significant concern. But the discussions out there about the concerns that face farmers and the way that ceding more of our family agriculture to corporate larger entities can certainly sway some members as well. That's going to be a point of discussion for Dairy Together efforts and for farmers union to think about more how to talk about that. But it's certainly a good dialogue we're going to need to have with consumer groups.
Thanks. Another question. Someone asked, farm bills have their share of disappointments. What mistakes do you see in this process, and how can we as farmers and farm groups avoid some of the past mistakes?
Yeah. Well, a couple points. So I think I mentioned a little bit about how the markets could shift or have a big impact on how farm bills are approached. And it seems that when I'll speak to commodity programs here in particular, because that's what I'm most familiar with, but when prices are high for commodities and farmers, the projections are showing that they will stay high, oftentimes that doesn't play out as projected. And when farm programs start to follow the market a little bit, when they, for instance, I think the Agriculture Risk Coverage Program right now, which is a 5-year Olympic average of what an average price was each year, that can kind of, the protection level goes up as markets increase, but then goes down as the prices go down too. So at some point, you'd start to run out of any sort of safety net if prices went down a whole bunch. The alternative to that was the price loss coverage program, which sets a fixed or pretty much fixed reference price, so that if prices go down and when you need help, help would be there to make up some of that difference. So I think in general, that idea that thinking that high prices are going to last forever, or that we're not going to need some sort of safety net, oftentimes can be a mistake. And making sure you've got farm bills written and designed to kick in the tough times, not just all the time, is really where the one of those bigger mistakes has been. Another piece, though, is having too many fights out in the open. I think if there's a way to have, this isn't always possible or can't always work, but to have a plan in a united front going up to Capitol Hill, because sometimes if you go up and make Congress choose sides, they're not going to choose the right side. Usually they don't, frankly. And that can be a real challenge. So if you can jumpstart some of those negotiations and go up to Capitol Hill with an idea and some togetherness, that can oftentimes help. But that's not always possible. Just try to minimize that open debate or open conflict when possible.
Thanks. One last question. We're about to spend the next couple of many months talking about the Farm Bill. Are there parts of this that you find hopeful or encouraging in the discussions that we'll be having?
Yeah. What I think is most hopeful and encouraging about farm bills these days is that the overall effort to bring more interests into the Farm Bill is a good example of how we as farmers and as farmers union members and as rural citizens, oftentimes, how we want to not isolate and want to embrace more like-minded individuals and bring all of our interests together. I think that's pretty hopeful. Now, the fact that that doesn't always work out and that the plans of the Farm Bill sometimes don't result in the outcomes we hope for, that's difficult and something we need to work with. But the fact that we're trying to build up a coalition rather than break apart coalitions and split and isolate parts of it is encouraging. And how things come around and people start to work together is, I think, the most hopeful part of the Farm Bill process.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Vivienne. Thank you to Mike for being our presenters today and answering questions. Thank you to all of our participants who joined in today. Again, the recording of this will be emailed out to you once that's available. And for those of you who will be joining us at our convention on Saturday, look forward to seeing you there. Thank you all. Thanks.